Welcome, everyone. I'm Terri Austin, and you're watching Law&Crime Report. Today, we have the CEO, Carole Baskin, of the Big Cat Rescue and a cast member in the upcoming season of Dancing with the Stars. She has moved to dismiss a complaint filed by her former husband's children. Her husband, Don Lewis, went missing in 1997 and was officially presumed dead in 2002. No charges have been filed in connection with his death. Lewis's adult children are seeking information about his estate. Baskin claims that any issues surrounding the estate were already settled by the parties and sanctioned, in fact, by the court. Let's take a look at what Lewis's daughters hope the case will uncover.
Well, we're hoping that it will encourage someone to come forward. We do believe that there are people out there that have information, but they're afraid to come forward for various reasons. Some people are afraid they will lose their home, lose their animals, and so we're hoping this will encourage them to come forward.
For information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for the murder of Don Lewis.
Correct.
All right, so have you guys heard of a reward being out there before for your dad's case?
Yes, at the very beginning, Carole put a poster, missing person poster out with a reward of $100,000.
Okay, I've never seen the poster, but I did see something just the other day where she talked about a reward for $100,000. I don't know if it's still active or not.
Well, hopefully it is. She would want someone to come forward to find her missing husband.
So that was just, you heard the daughters trying there to say why they, in fact, are bringing this complaint. We have with us today juvenile judge Ashley Willcott and also trial attorney Katherine Smith. And I'm going to start with you, Judge. They filed, the children did, this what they call bill of discovery, and it's not an actual complaint for damages, but they are looking to get information so that they can file for a complaint and for damages. What would their damages be actually here?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, but damages could be, for instance, the estate that they received could have been much greater if, in fact, he had lived, survived, and kept the grounds and the tiger business that he had. Number two, pain and suffering. They've lost this father figure, this person who's bigger than life in all of the stories that we see on Netflix. And so as a result, pain and suffering are part of the damages that they could request.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, you know, you're right about that, because some of the information they're talking about is the will, the actual will and the power of attorney. Katie, do you think that if they could get some more information about those documents, that they could, in fact, determine that there's more assets in the estate?
Yes, that, and they also might be using this as an end run around getting some discovery to push forward any possible criminal case. So it looks like there could be a lot of goals, but the main problem here is statute of limitations. This happened, what, 23 years ago? Or rather, it was deemed by the court 23 years late. So I don't understand how they can get around this in terms of statute of limitations concerns.
Right. You know, it's funny because I was going to ask, don't you think all of these claims are time barred? And the fact that even if they were to find some information, why didn't they bring this earlier? So I think you make some very good points. Let's take a look at a clip now of one of the daughters discussing the memorial. Oh, okay. So, you know, we'll take a look at that later. But one of the things I did want to mention is that Baskin thinks that the timing is too convenient. You remember when we had the, you know, Tiger King, and everybody early in March was watching the show. And Baskin is actually claiming that this is why they are now bringing the claims as opposed to bringing it before. Do you think that's the case, Judge Ashley?
I think that might have something to do with it. So first of all, I think one of the reasons they filed this for discovery to find out information is maybe to satisfy themselves. They want to know what happened to their father. Anyone would want to know what happened to their father, not necessarily to pursue a lawsuit, but to get that information. And I think that the documentary brought it all up again and made it fresh in their minds. So I think the timing might be related to that. The other thing I want to mention, though, it's my understanding that 22 years ago, there was a settlement between Baskin and these same plaintiffs that have filed this bill of discovery, and there was a stipulation to settle any legal issues between them. So I think a potential barrier is what's in the face of that settlement agreement, and does that, in fact, include language that prohibits or prevents plaintiffs from now filing a pure bill of discovery? That's an outstanding question, and it may make this filing go away.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. One thing I wanted to ask is whether or not, Katie, and I'll ask this to you, if we have agreements and settlements where we resolve all of the issues between the parties and we begin to still file these complaints or these bills of discovery, then what does that say about the paper that these settlement agreements are written on? And in fact, the judge actually sanctioned the agreement.
I agree completely. It really, when you have a settlement agreement, it all depends on the specific language of the agreement, because this is not asking for relief other than information. I personally, just from what I'm hearing and reading about this, I think they might be doing this to really light a fire under the authorities to dig a little bit deeper, because just like the documentary, this drudges up a lot of information, a lot of news. We're talking about it, and this might really incentivize the authorities to look into this deeper. So there may be some actual goal beyond prevailing in the instant lawsuit.
Right. And, one of the things that Baskin is claiming is that it's a fishing expedition. And I do think that it is a fishing expedition because the complaint did not actually list, when you look at the complaint, specific allegations. And one of the things that you have to do in a bill of discovery is list what are the allegations that you would bring. And Judge, do you think that, the complaint could actually state some causes of action against against Carole?
I think it could have been more drafted with more specifics to address that the allegations are contained in it. But I'm also going to suggest this. I see lots of lawyers every single day who have filed discovery in cases. Discovery often is a fishing expedition. So as long as you put enough information to meet the statutory requirements, through discovery, you're looking to see what else is out there. What else do we not know? What can be used against this party? So keep that in mind. And I just think that it's going to be up to the court to decide if they were specific enough in the words of the discovery or not.
Right, exactly. And, even if they are allowed to bring this complaint, I would say, Katie, that they would have a really difficult time because of what's going on with the pandemic. I mean, even if they were to prevail, when would we be able to see the case at trial?
There's so many things in the way. And I think that, obviously we have the pandemic, we have the prior settlement agreement. We have the statute of limitations. That's why when I'm hearing this, I think, well, what is really the purpose behind this? It makes me think that this isn't being run after for the merits, but for, like I had suggested before, to really get the authorities to look at this with a little bit closer eye. So to all you cool cats and kittens out there, I think there's more to come.
That's a great way of putting it. And listen, I do think they are trying to get the authorities to look more into this, because when you think about Don Lewis, he hasn't been found. And Judge, I'll ask you this. Do you think that bringing this now will bring it back into the media and will pressure the authorities to actually determine what happened? I know they declared him dead, but no charges have been filed.
Right. So, yes. Absolutely, it is going to put pressure, and it's going to blow up again, in my opinion. Why? Because it was wildly successful. Say Tiger King to anybody, and they know what you're talking about. So this is going to bring that up again, and I do think the media is going to catch hold of that, start talking about it, and necessarily that does put pressure on law enforcement to really solve a cold case. This is still a cold case, presumed to be dead, but nobody knows what really happened or where the body is. So I would suggest it's a cold case, and there are answers out there somewhere.
I agree with that. And you know, what's interesting is that we haven't heard anything from the authorities about how they're investigating it or whether or not what actually happened to him. And I do think, Katie, that that's important. I think everyone needs to know what happened and how the body was disposed of. So do you think that this might actually result in, as you know, the judge said, opening up this cold case?
I do. I think that there's probably a lot more obviously going on behind the scenes than we know about, because there's this weird pressure that the authorities get when things become public. There's been a long stream of HBO documentaries and Netflix documentaries that wind up unearthing essentially cold cases and having things re-examined. So, which is great. But as the authorities, you want to not be too reactionary, right? You don't want to make it look like the tail is wagging the dog. You want to have some control. So I imagine that there's a lot more going on, and once they release it, it's going to be when they have a more fully baked understanding of what their position is.
Right, I agree with that. Do you think, and Katie, I'll end this with you before we go to break, do you think that they will actually find the body here? I know that, you know, that's a difficult question, but there are some who are saying that she fed his body to the lions. And if obviously that's the case, we will not find the body.
That's the thing. I don't want to be glib about it, but there is a lot of speculation that's how she disposed of the body. I mean, there's been tons of coverage on this and even songs about it. I mean, if she really was involved in the murder, it makes sense that she would dispose of the body that way. And if that were the case, how would we ever find him?
Exactly. So, well, let's hope that this will lead to opening the cold case and resolving the cold case. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we will be talking about the Amber Guyger case.
What are you thinking when you're standing there holding your wife?
How could that happen to us, our family? How could we have lost Botham? Such a sweet boy. He tried his best to live a good, honest life. He loved God. He loved everyone. How could this happen to him? How could hindsight, what could we have done? And my family is broken-hearted. How could it be possible? I'll never see him again. And I want to see him. I still want to see him. It's hard. I've never experienced a close death in my family. It's hard not hearing his voice.
Welcome back, everyone. We just heard Botham Jean. He is the father of Botham Jean, who was shot by ex-police officer Amber Guyger back in September 2018. Guyger was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years for shooting John in his own apartment, which she mistakenly thought was her apartment. Guyger is appealing the conviction, and John's family is filing a wrongful death suit against the owner of the apartment complex, the management company, and the manufacturer of the door locking system. Judge, I'm back to you. I have to ask, do you think that there's a chance this will prevail, especially the negligence maintenance of the premises?
That's exactly. First of all, you know, I covered this case with Law&Crime, and absolutely this is just one of the most horrible cases in terms of circumstances, and everything went wrong, and it's just a terrible, tragic case. Having said that, the negligence is something that I think could prevail, and here's the reason. Because they have an obligation, a responsibility, a duty, I would argue, to ensure that the doors work in the apartment complex. And my understanding in this case is that it did not work. Was it defective? That's the question that's going to have to be answered. It was unreasonably dangerous. I think you can prove that, because as a result of the door not closing and locking, if that's the case factually, this Amber Guyger testified she thought she was on her floor, the third floor. He lived on the fourth floor, and as a result, she was able to actually push the door open. So I think potentially there's some real merit in this defective mechanism argument.
I agree. And so, Katie, let me ask you this. They interviewed a number of people who lived in the apartment complex, and several of them mentioned the fact that their key fob was not working either. So doesn't that give the owner and even the maintenance people for the premises a duty to fix the broken key fob?
Yes, and there's two real ways to look at this. I think that there's like a products liability issue, and then there's the negligent maintenance by the facility, right? And I think that the facility maintenance is probably the best allegation from what I know, simply because if these things weren't working, then people made complaints. And if people make complaints, they're on notice. And as we all know, negligence is all about notice. If that facility knew that they weren't working, it's reasonably foreseeable that someone could walk into an apartment and harm another person, and that would put them on the hook 100%.
Exactly. Judge, the three parties who've been sued, the manufacturer of the key fob, the owner of the premises, and those who were maintaining the premises, of those three, which one of them do you think is more responsible for making sure this key fob was working?
Listen, I think it's going to end up being what we call splitting the baby in the middle. And I suspect there's going to be some responsibility found for each of them. I don't think this was one person or one act that caused it, but rather issues along the path, which could make each of them responsible in some capacity.
Exactly. Katie, so there's also been some allegations that going up to each of these apartments is confusing, that they all look the same. But how can that be negligence just because it all looks the same? Isn't that the case for every apartment building?
Yeah, I think that that's less of a good claim, right? I mean, let's put it this way. If these doors were working perfectly, right, would there be enough to sue the facility for the doors just looking the same? And I don't see it. I don't think that that's enough.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think so either. But they made a very big deal out of the fact that they all look the same. And if you remember, Judge, for the trial, they took a long time talking about the fact that there was a different carpet, but, she didn't recognize that, so it all looked the same. Do you think that the apartment complex, and here I think it would be the owner of the apartment complex, could be liable for having all of the floors and the garage look the same?
I think it would be a hard case to prove. And that's because, just like Katie said, listen, that's what apartment complexes, facilities do. They look at the aesthetics, and often it means all of the floors are identical and the same marble floors and the same carpeting. That's done intentionally. So I think that's a hard point to prove.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, we also look at what other, maintenance has been done at the apartment building. Katie, do you think if they showed records that, look, they tried to maintain, they fixed some of the fobs, but because of the weather, they shouldn't be held liable because these things happen, and that people should take responsibility for making sure they're going into their right apartment?
I think that when you own a facility or a complex and you're providing the tenants with locking systems, they got to lock. I mean, the whole purpose of a door locking is so it can prevent people from entering your apartment. And if someone enters your apartment who shouldn't be there, it's reasonably foreseeable that they would commit a crime in there, including murder. So if this facility knew that these locks were not working and they dropped the ball and they didn't fix it, they're in big trouble.
I agree. I think it's a good claim that they're making here, and let's see what happens. I know they are asking for over $1 million. It could very well be that they will get more than $1 million. Let's take a look now at what Botham Jean's mom had to say.
My life has not been the same. It's just been like a roller coaster. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. It's just been the most terrible time for me. I almost I'm not able to work. But I just try to busy myself just to see if it will get out of my head. But it's been very, very, very difficult.
And so, since this incident has occurred, you haven't been able to go back to work?
I went back to work in January of this year. But it's very, very difficult. I've been sick often. And I have to try to keep the family together because everybody's in pain. I've had to seek counseling every Tuesday. I have to get a therapist to come in and help. And I try to pray and fast and do all sorts of things just to help me get by.
That was Botham Jean. That was Botham's mom, and it's been very difficult for her since he was shot and killed. Judge, do you think that her testimony, obviously it was something that helped in the trial, but she's been going through a lot?
Yeah, this one just breaks my heart. But listen, the fact of the matter is, it would be hard as a family member to understand, how could this possibly have happened? It makes no sense. He's in his apartment and somebody just walks in and murders him. It doesn't make sense. And so part of the reason, I think, behind lawsuits is to make sense of it, but hold those responsible who, if it's products liability or negligence, if they met the legal grounds to prove those things, they want to hold those people responsible. I also think you're going to see a lot of finger pointing. The apartment complex is going to point fingers at the manufacturer of the locking device. They're going to point fingers at the key fobs. I mean, it's going to be an ugly, messy, who's really responsible. But bottom line, absolutely, there is going to be a face on the lawsuit, and it is the mother and father who I'm sure continue to grieve and struggle to get through every day because it was a senseless act that they lost their son to.
Well, not only that, but we also know that Amber Geiger's attorney are filing an appeal. Katie, they're going to have to go through, the mother and father are going to have to go through that all over again. They're trying to say that this was not murder, that if anything, it was criminally negligent homicide. What are your thoughts about that?
Man, I feel, just like the judge said, I feel strongly about this case, man. It was so hard to see this go. It was absolutely so senseless. Luckily, though, with an appeal, I don't think the parents will have to testify. Usually appeals are done on the papers. But here's another thing that I think is going to be particularly painful. People are going to blame him for the door locking because we really don't know what happened because he can't testify. And so I guarantee some defense of the civil case is going to be that he simply didn't lock his door. And that's going to be really painful for the family to have it basically deflected back to him.
Right. No, I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's really a difficult case, and we've heard a lot out in the public domain already about the fact that this appeal is being filed, and the fact that, you know, we heard that in court, the parties actually tried to reconcile, and yet we have this appeal going on now. Judge, do you think that this might have been negligent homicide, or do you look at it like, because she said on the stand this was intentional, that it was actually murder?
Well, I think it is a unique case. This is not a typical fact pattern that we see in murder cases. And I think because of that, there may be grounds for appeal, because the reality is, yes, she admitted she did it, but by all accounts, she didn't realize it wasn't her home. And she thought it was her home when she entered. And that unique fact pattern could mean that a murder conviction might stand grounds for appeal.
Exactly. All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more.
Los Angeles Fire Department firefighter Frank Aguilar, we learned from Mexican authorities, may have been the victim of a violent kidnapping in Baja California. I want to say very clearly to anybody who would kidnap a member of our fire department that this is a member not just of our city government family, but of our community here in Los Angeles. We will work tirelessly to make sure that Frank is returned safely, that this is somebody who has put his life on the line for us, and we will do everything in our power, working together with the Mexican government, through our State Department, as the City of Los Angeles, and with our local Consul General from Mexico, to ensure that law enforcement in Mexico has whatever support it needs. And if this message gets to anybody who would dare kidnap an Angelino who serves the people of Los Angeles, let him go and make sure that he is able to safely return to our city and to his family.
Welcome back. That was Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. He announced that the city firefighter, Frank Aguilar, may have been the victim of a violent kidnapping from his condo in Rosito, Mexico. Mayor Eric Garcetti said the city is working with the Mexican government and the U.S. State Department for his safe return. Aguilar worked for the L.A. Fire Department for 20 years, and he's been missing now for 2 weeks. This was one of the border towns, Judge Willcott, and he was kidnapped, and apparently there was a video from the security camera. Do you think he was a target because he, in fact, is a city employee? He, in fact, was working for Los Angeles as a fire department person.
Well, it's really hard to know exactly why he might have been a target. If he was a target, there could be a lot of different factors going on. We don't know what he did in his off time. Perhaps he has financial means that haven't been disclosed, and as a result, that can be a person with money can be a target, obviously. But regardless of the reason why he was a target, if he was, I'm really glad to see that the government's doing the right thing. The city is doing the right thing. You're right on a border. Mexico is there. You have to work with that country to determine what happened to this person and where they are, and find out and try to save him and or find the perpetrator who did this. So the government, city's doing the right thing.
Right, exactly. Katie Smith, actually, I do think that the fact he was a city employee is going to help. The government, I agree with Judge Willcott 100%, is doing the right thing. Do you think had this been a regular U.S. citizen, we would be able to have the U.S. authorities working so closely with the Mexican authority in this case?
Yeah, of course, you really hope so. And, this is sadly not the first time these things have happened. But the fact that someone was a public servant, it obviously galvanizes that support because people are even more indignant. But to your last point about the reasoning, I read under some reports that his dirt bike and a Jeep were missing. So those are some of the things that automatically alert us to the reason that this may have happened. It doesn't seem it was like a personal hit. It seems like this had to do something with his means and resources. And it's so sad that someone's life could be lost for something that just seems so frivolous.
Exactly. And, they said that the Mexican authorities are cooperating, Judge. And, to what extent do you think they may be cooperating, or they, might want to protect the people of their country? I mean, I don't know how these negotiations take place, but in terms of the two countries working together, do you think there's a lot of cooperation there?
Well, as a trial attorney, I actually have a Pale contract through the Mexican consulate here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I work a lot with the Mexican government as a result. And let me just say, my experience has been they are very cooperative. And while they certainly will protect their citizens' rights, absolutely, they also are receptive to ensuring that if a person is missing or has been kidnapped, that they do everything they can to help find that person first and foremost. So I think they can do that hand in hand and do the right thing. And in my instances, they've always done that and stepped up to help.
Well, that's great to know. Judge, let me follow up with that. Do you think that the U.S., along with the local authorities here, will be doing the negotiation? Who's going to take the lead on that?
I think that the Department of Justice is going to be the one involved taking the lead on that, because it is a U.S. citizen, as I understand it anyways, that is disappeared. And as a result, I think that's going to be the agency that takes the lead.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Katie, just so I can end up with this particular case that we're talking about, the family, we know from reading the reports that the family, the daughters, are really distraught about this. What must they be going through, and what can they hope for?
I can't even imagine how difficult this would be. And just like in anything, it's that not knowing and understanding that there was foul play and not being able to find him just must be so agonizing. So similar to sort of the Carole Baskin story we were just talking about, families want resolution. And even if the result isn't necessarily favorable, coming to a resolution, and hopefully it is favorable, is really, really what they're looking for.
Exactly. Yeah, let's just hope that there is a resolution to that and that he comes home safely. So let's switch gears to the case of Kareem El-Karani. He's a former United Nations employee who was arrested for making false statements to the FBI to cover up a 2016 incident where he allegedly drugged and sexually assaulted a woman. The incident took place when El-Karani was working as a communications specialist in Iraq. He had dinner and drinks with the woman and took her to his apartment where she alleged that she became unconscious and was sexually assaulted. Judge, this is a horrible, horrible case. And, you know, he's been charged with lying to authorities. One thing I was thinking about is, okay, those are serious charges, obviously, but what about the underlying charges? Don't we need to follow up on those as well?
I think they're probably doing that. That's exactly what I thought when I read this and heard about this case. And that is, listen, I think they must just have the investigation and the evidence in a place to charge him with lying. But I promise you, I think they're still investigating, gathering the evidence on the underlying charges. Because guess what? When you look deeper into this case, this is not the only alleged victim. There are multiple alleged victims. So I think the work behind the scenes to investigate, to be able to bring the right charges, continues.
Exactly. And we do know that the authorities, Katie, are asking for others to step up, and they are probably looking for more information. Do you think in this case, hopefully, they might get other people to step up? There is some evidence that this has happened before with him.
Absolutely. The more this gets out into the public and the more people hear about it, the more likely it is that other people are going to come forward, because it's usually that first person stepping forward is the hardest. It gives strength to other victims, and it also will really incentivize people who were maybe not victims, but who were witnesses to come forward. The problem, though, is that the actual assault did not take place on U.S. soil. So that's going to be really tough to ferret out, because obviously the U.S. has limited jurisdiction.
Exactly. Yeah. Judge Willcott, let me ask you this. This sounds very similar to the Bill Cosby case, when there was a drugging that took place and then the assaults that took place. Do you think that the case might proceed if, in fact, we do get more information from these other women about the alleged drugging and the alleged assaults?
Oh, I think absolutely that's the goal, is to get any additional information about any other victims or witnesses who are out there. But Katie raised a really good point, and that's jurisdiction. There is limited jurisdiction if, in fact, none of those crimes occurred on U.S. soil, and that's one of the issues they're going to have to contend with based on what they learned during the continuing investigation.
Exactly. So if we have these other women, Katie, you know how we have the Molyneux witnesses who came in to testify in the Weinstein case. Do you think that the women will actually, once they come forward, be allowed to testify?
Well, and it depends coming forward for what necessarily. So will they be allowed to testify in the actual case that he's been in trouble for now, the lying? Probably not. And it depends if he's actually charged with the underlying assault. I really think what they're trying to do now is to get all these victims to come forward to see if there's a crime, other crimes, for which had a nexus in the United States. And then that they would be able to charge him here, so they'd have control over that prosecution and the investigation. And at that point, it's really up to the trial judge what they allow in. But remember, Molyneux is a slim exception. It's usually not like Weinstein and Cosby. It usually doesn't work that way.
Yeah, let me follow up with you, Katie. Do you think that what will they have to prove as far as this individual is concerned and as far as her assault is concerned? What kind of evidence are they going to have to show?
I mean, in terms of that one, again, I think unless they find something that is directly linked to U.S. soil, it's going to be tough to go after him for that one. But if they find other domestic assaults and they can string them together as a policy and a practice, and they're within the statute of limitations, lots of ifs, ands, or buts. It's a lot to find, especially with COVID and people are locked down. There's an uphill battle. But they got him for the lying, and once you get him inside, you have a lot more pressure that you can apply on him.
That makes a lot of sense to me. All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, Britney Spears is back in the news. Welcome back, everyone. Britney Spears is back in the news. For over a decade, she's been under a conservatorship where her daily life and her finances are being overseen by a guardian, which so far has been her father, Jamie, for a majority of the time since the conservatorship was established. But in recent months, the hashtag Free Britney Spears movement has surged online as rumors have spread that Jamie is not only suppressing his daughter via his conservatorship, but that the public has also questioned whether he's skimming money from Britney Spears' fortune. Judge Willcott, this conservatorship, to me, it seems as though, first of all, just explain to us why she would have to be put under a conservatorship. What is the court looking for when they, in fact, say you need to have a conservator?
Terry, great question. It has to be that the person is incapacitated in some regard. So, for instance, we were talking earlier, it could be an elderly person with dementia, and they're incapacitated and cannot take proper care of their money and their estate and their property to do the right things with it. It could be because of mental health issues. But let me suggest this. A person being incapacitated means that there's some evidence that they've spent or frivolously done with their own monies, or perhaps they've given it all away to scams and somebody wants to protect the rest of what's there. 10 years later, if you follow Britney Spears in the news, I need to say she seems to be pretty together. She seems to be working and doing things, and you see her with her children, you see her with her significant other. I mean, all the things that a person is doing. And so I would argue that the real question is she still incapacitated? Does she suffer from mental health diagnosis that's untreated or some other reason that she cannot manage her own things? And I don't know that that still exists today.
Exactly. Katie Smith, let's follow up with that. Do you think that behind the scenes there's something going on here that we don't know about? When we look at Britney Spears and she's still performing and she's still raising her children, she looks as though she doesn't have any serious mental illness. But do you think behind the scenes that there is something else going on here?
The quick answer to that is there's definitely something going on behind the scenes because we're not able to really see what's going on at these hearings. We don't know what her mental health capacity is. And even though someone might look like they function well in society, we all know very well that doesn't mean that there's other issues that would prohibit them from taking care of themselves or their finances. That said, a conservatorship is a high bar. And it's not a permanent state, meaning just because one was appointed a year ago, 2 years ago, 2 months ago, doesn't mean that it stays. You have to continually be renewed and evaluated. So when I said stuff going behind the scenes, they're evaluating her for mental health stuff, 100%. So we don't know what's going on. And the fact if this is continued leads me to believe, obviously, that there's lasting mental health problems.
Right, exactly. Judge Willcott, you know, we know so far that the father for all of these years has been managing the estate, but people are saying that he might be taking money off of the top. Don't you think it would make much more sense to have an independent administer the conservatorship?
Well, those are two very different things. So obviously, any time that a family member is the one responsible for managing, yes, they may take advantage of that circumstance. Now, the difference is you have an independent trust administrator, for instance. it's going to cost more. There's going to be a different type of fee, potentially. And so it might cost a little more money, but some would argue the advantage to that is they're more objective. They're not personally motivated to take money off the top or feel like it should be theirs because they're related to the particular person. So there is opportunity there, and that is my understanding of what Britney Spears is saying. If I have to be under this conservatorship, I want it to be with an independent company taking care of managing my money, not my own father.
You know, I am so shocked that they haven't changed it to someone who's been independent. And in fact, Katie, they're talking about her sister now perhaps overtaking the estate. If Britney wants an independent company to take over, why not just have it go to an independent company?
I completely agree. I think it's so weird that her family is involved in this. You know, Britney Spears is not like just some regular person down the street who has a couple dollars that their dad can look over. She has millions and millions of dollars that I'm sure are in complicated assets, real estate. Just by that alone, I would think that an independent person to oversee this would make wildly more sense than her father or her sister. And as the judge said, it removes that incentive, that feeling that there's some entitlement to the estate. I think it's just a no-brainer. Get an independent person to oversee this if necessary.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it was back in 2007 that she really started to have all of the difficulties. She had 2 quick marriages, as we saw. She had 2 children. But we remember that incident where she took the electronic clippers and shaved her head. Judge Willcott, that sort of incident would make you think that she should have a conservator looking at her estate. But do you think that continuing on, we would have to have those types of incidents as well?
Well, I'm going to piggyback on what Katie said, and that is the public has to be very careful to draw conclusions based on what they see, whether it's her shaving her head or her dressed perfectly and having her children out eating ice cream. Regardless of what type of thing you see in the public eye, there are evaluations that are done to see whether or not the person's competent. And it doesn't matter how they appear as much as it's determined by the full evaluation. Are they competent at this point in time? So the surface doesn't tell us what we need to know in terms of the legalities of whether or not she needs somebody to manage her money.
Okay, yeah. You know, frankly, the conservatorship has gone from the father to the sister, Jamie Lynn Spears. So it'll be interesting to see how Jamie does the, administration of that differently from her father. You know, the hashtag Free Britney Spears has been really prevalent. What do you think, Katie, about the hashtag and what and how it will influence what happens to Britney and her estate?
You know, I admit I've been following this a little bit. I've actually been looking into some of the conspiracy theories out there where certain people, fans who are watching, they're giving Britney messages like on Instagram saying, hey, if you're in trouble and you're afraid to tell us, wear a yellow top. And then that's an actual example. And then the next day she wore a yellow top. So there's so much interesting stuff that's happening constantly with her fan community. That said, will that bleed into the actual legal analysis? I hope not. It shouldn't. But what it does is it shines a light so that all the parties involved, including the judge, are realizing that they're under scrutiny. And I never think that that's a bad thing. It just causes people to do their job really well.
Exactly. You know, her dad thinks that the movement is a joke, but public opinion is very important. Judge Willcott, do you think that this will influence the overall decision to take the conservatorship totally out of the family and finally put it into an independent organization? Or frankly, I think one of the things that Britney wants is to manage her own affairs.
Right. So first of all, a court or a judge has to base it on the evidence presented, not public opinion, unless that's brought into the court and asked to take judicial notice of it. Otherwise, that really doesn't matter in the court of law. But I'm going to say this, devil's advocate, there are a lot of people out there that have money, that are managing their own money, but that do crazy things, that act different ways, that may have underlying mental health issues. That in and of itself does not mean that somebody cannot be responsible for their own money. And so to me, I think after 10 years, the question really becomes, is it at a point where she's really going to put herself at risk if she manages her own money? Is she incompetent to the extent that it's necessary for a court to be involved? And that is what the court has to answer, because some would argue, listen, she's working, she's making her own money, she can spend it however she wants.
Well, I think that's exactly right. One quick follow-up with you, Judge. Should she be spending her own money and doing exactly what she wants with it?
Absolutely, unless the legal standard is met that she's so incapacitated that it's a requirement that the court step in and somebody else manage it. That's the legal question that has to be answered.
Exactly. Well, let's hope they answer that question. I want to thank my two guests, Judge Ashley Willcott, Katherine Smith, also known as Katie Smith. Thanks for watching Law and Crime, and we will see you again next week. Have a great weekend.